Her title? Ma'am, around here, you earn your respect in the water and the mud, not behind some desk in D.C. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed off the corrugated steel walls of the kill house. The crowd of SEAL candidates, young men carved from granite and ambition, let out a collective, nervous chuckle. It was the sound of pack animals affirming the alpha's dominance. The woman in the simple Navy working uniform, devoid of any visible rank, gave no reaction. Her face remained a placid lake, her gaze fixed on the intricate dance of tactical failure unfolding within the training scenario. She offered no defense, no retort, no flicker of indignation. Her silence was a vacuum, and the lead instructor, Chief Petty Officer Miller, despised vacuums. He felt the need to fill it with more of his own bluster, more of his own certainty. But when the base commander, watching from the darkened observation deck above, saw the woman's stance, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift of her weight onto the balls of her feet, the way her hands rested calmly at her sides, yet pulsed with a coiled readiness, a slow, knowing smile touched her lips. She knew the storm that was about to break. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type quiet professional below. The air inside Building 4 at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was a thick cocktail of salt, sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of spent brass. It was a cathedral of controlled violence, a place where boys were systematically broken down and reassembled into the most elite fighting men on the planet. Today, the liturgy was close quarters battle, and the sermon was being delivered by Chief Miller. He was a man built of pig iron and dogma, a veteran of a dozen unnamed conflicts whose personality had been forged in the same crucible as his profession. He saw the world in binaries, strong and weak, asset and liability, SEAL and everyone else. The woman standing off to the side, clipboard in hand, fell squarely and infuriatingly into the latter category. She had arrived that morning with a set of orders from Naval Special Warfare Command, a quiet introduction, and an aura of academic detachment that grated on Miller's every nerve. She looked like an analyst, a bureaucrat, a creature of PowerPoint presentations and sterile conference rooms. Her slight build and the intellectual focus in her dark eyes were, in his brutally simple calculus, disqualifying factors. He had watched her for an hour, this silent observer, as his trainees fumbled their way through a complex hostage rescue scenario. She never flinched at the simulated explosions, never offered a comment, her pen simply moving across her notes with a maddeningly steady rhythm. Her calm was an accusation. It felt like judgment, and Miller, a man accustomed to being the sole arbiter in this domain, could not abide it. He decided to make an example of her, to use her as a teaching tool, a physical manifestation of the useless bureaucracy he believed was diluting the warrior ethos. He stopped the exercise, the trainees panting and frustrated, their gear slick with sweat. He turned, making a grand, theatrical gesture toward her. It was then he delivered his opening salvo, the dismissive remark about earning respect in the mud, not from a title. The trainees, eager to curry favor and release their own tension, responded exactly as he'd hoped. Their laughter was a wave of validation. But the woman, Commander Anya Sharma, did not break. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission. It was a quiet, "I hear you," that carried an unnerving subtext of, "And you have no idea what you're saying." This infuriating composure only stoked Miller's fire. He saw it as arrogance, the protected confidence of the untouchable officer class. He didn't see the profound patience of a predator, the absolute certainty of someone whose skills had been honed so far beyond his own that his provocations were like pebbles thrown in a mountain. The silence she commanded was not weakness. It was a weaponized form of control. While he was managing the room with volume, she was controlling it with absence. The trainees, initially amused, began to feel a subtle shift. The chief's performance was becoming strained, his insults more pointed, as if he were trying to force a reaction, any reaction, that would confirm his prejudice. He was punching at smoke, and the effort was making him look foolish. But he was too deep in his own narrative to see it. He saw only a challenge to his authority, an unwelcome intrusion into his kingdom of sand and steel, and he was determined to put this desk-bound officer in her place, once and for all. He wanted to humiliate her, to strip away the veneer of her rank and expose the perceived softness beneath. He had no way of knowing that he was not stripping away a veneer, but rather picking at the latch of a cage holding something he couldn't possibly comprehend. He was about to learn a lesson in respect that would be seared into the very soul of his command, a lesson delivered not with words, but with an act of such breathtaking competence it would forever alter the definition of professional for every man present. The chief's frustration curdled into a sneer, a theatrical display of contempt meant for his audience of aspiring warriors. He strode across the grated floor, the sound of his boots a rhythmic stomp of authority. He stopped a few feet from Commander Sharma, deliberately invading her personal space. "You see, ma'am," he began, his voice dripping with mock pedagogy. "Out here, theory is a ghost. It vanishes the second the first round is fired. We deal in practice. We deal in muscle memory forged by a million repetitions until you can do it blind, deaf, and bleeding." He gestured back toward the kill house, a labyrinth of scarred plywood and pop-up targets. "My men have failed this scenario 6 times. It's designed that way. It's designed to be impossible for their current skill level. It teaches them humility. It shows them the brutal gap between good enough and flawless. It's a lesson you don't get from a briefing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, then turned back to her, his eyes glinting with malicious inspiration. "But you've been watching, taking your little notes. You must have some insights, some high-level, strategic perspective we dirt kickers are missing." The sarcasm was a blunt instrument. "So how about it, Commander? Since you're here to observe, why don't you give us a demonstration? Show these tadpoles how it's done from the Pentagon." The challenge hung in the air, thick and toxic. "Affirmative, Chief." The 2 words were spoken so quietly they were almost lost in the hum of the ventilation system, yet they landed with the force of a grenade. The chief's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the response he expected. He had anticipated excuses, a deferral to rank, a retreat into policy. He had not anticipated simple, direct compliance. For a fleeting moment, a sliver of doubt pierced his armor of certainty, but he crushed it instantly. She was calling his bluff. Fine. He would let this play out to its inevitable, embarrassing conclusion. He would give her the stage she so clearly, foolishly wanted. The atmosphere in the room had transformed. The last vestiges of humor had evaporated, replaced by a tense, voyeuristic curiosity. The trainees were no longer watching a simple humiliation. They were watching a drama unfold, a high-stakes gamble where pride and reputation were the currency. They watched as Sharma walked toward the equipment racks. Her movements were not hurried. They were economical, deliberate, a study in conservation of energy. There was a rhythm to her actions that was deeply unsettling to the trained eyes watching her. It was the rhythm of endless repetition, the same muscle memory the chief had just been pontificating about. They had all seen trainees gear up, a process often marked by fumbled clips and anxious adjustments. Sharma's process was different. It was a ritual. Her hands, which had seemed so suited to a pen just moments before, moved with an intelligence of their own. She didn't select the newest, most tricked-out M4A1 rifle. She chose an older, more basic model, one that showed the subtle wear of constant use. Her fingers danced over it, checking the action, the seating of the magazine, the tension of the sling. It was an intimate conversation between an artisan and her tool. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke a language older and more profound than any verbal boast, a language of pure, unadulterated competence. The chief watched, his arms still crossed, but the confident smirk had been replaced by a tight, thin line. The silence she was creating was louder than his entire tirade. It was the silence of focus, the silence before the storm, and for the first time that day, a cold knot of apprehension began to form in the pit of his stomach. He was beginning to suspect that the ghost of theory he had so arrogantly dismissed was about to materialize before his very eyes and haunt him for the rest of his career. The preparation was a symphony of silent precision. Commander Sharma adjusted the sling on the M4A1, not with a series of fumbling tugs, but with a single, fluid motion that settled the weapon perfectly against her shoulder. The rifle seemed to become an extension of her body, a seamless integration of flesh and steel. She picked up a helmet, her fingers tracing the rim for a moment before she settled it on her head, her movements so practiced they were devoid of thought. She didn't slam a magazine into the well. She guided it home with a firm, confident push until it seated with a clean, authoritative click. Each action was a verse in a poem of readiness, a physical manifestation of a mind entirely focused on the task ahead. The trainees watched, their earlier smirks now completely gone, replaced by expressions of rapt, almost fearful attention. They were witnessing a level of professionalism that was fundamentally different from the aggressive, high-energy readiness they had been taught. Sharma's was a state of absolute calm, a deep and abiding stillness that seemed to draw all the energy from the room and focus it into a single point. It was the calm of a surgeon before the first incision, of a bomb disposal technician over the final wire. It was the calm that comes only from having faced the abyss so many times that its terrors have become familiar. She performed a final press check, pulling the charging handle back just enough to confirm a round in the chamber, her thumb and forefinger moving with the delicate grace of a watchmaker. Then she turned toward the entrance of the kill house. She gave a single, sharp nod to the range safety officer in the control booth. It was the only signal she gave. She didn't announce her entry. She didn't shout. She simply flowed through the doorway, disappearing into the shadows like a wisp of smoke. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life, showing the black and white feed from the cameras inside. The timer in the corner began to count up. 0:01, 0:02. The entire room held its breath. The first room was a simple entryway with a pop-up target to the immediate left, a shoot target designed to startle. The trainees had all been slow on this one, their reaction time lagging. Sharma entered low and fast. Before the target had even fully locked into its upright position, 2 rounds had hammered its center mass. Pop, pop. The sound was sharp, controlled. The shots were so close together, they sounded like a single, stuttering report. On the monitor, 2 dark holes appeared in the cardboard chest, perfectly spaced, a controlled pair delivered within human speed. She didn't pause to admire her work. She was already moving, her steps silent and fluid, her rifle tracing lines of fire before the threats even appeared. The second room contained a no-shoot hostage target with a sliver of a shoot target visible over its shoulder. This was the failure point for most of the trainees. They either shot the hostage or hesitated too long. Sharma's rifle came up, canted slightly. For a millisecond, she was perfectly still. The rifle barked once. On the monitor, the sliver of the hostile target rocked back, a perfect hole appearing in the center of its head. The hostage target was untouched, pristine. A collective, involuntary gasp went through the room of observers. Chief Miller felt his jaw go slack. That wasn't just a good shot. It was a legendary shot, the kind of shot you heard stories about but rarely witnessed. It was a shot that required a level of trigger control and sight alignment that took decades to master. The timer read 0:07. She continued her relentless, elegant progress. Room after room, she moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. There were no wasted steps, no jerky movements, no moments of indecision. She was a phantom of violence, a ghost in the machine. A target appeared behind a stack of barrels. It was stitched with a 3-round burst before it could fully expose itself. Another swung from the ceiling. It was neutralized mid-swing. The final room was Miller's masterpiece of cruelty. It contained 3 hostile targets and 2 no-shoots, all of which activated simultaneously from different angles, a scenario designed to overwhelm a shooter's cognitive processing. It was meant to be an unwinnable fight. Sharma flowed into the room, and for a moment, she was a blur of motion. The rifle spoke in a staccato rhythm. Pop, 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 pop. It was over in less than 2 seconds. On the monitor, the 3 hostile targets were down, each with surgically precise hits. The 2 hostage targets stood untouched. The run was over. The timer on the screen stopped at 0:17. 17 seconds. The base record, set by a legendary DevGru operator years ago, was 24 seconds. The trainees had been averaging over a minute, with multiple penalties. 17 seconds was not just a new record. It was an impossibility. It was a statistical anomaly. It was the kind of performance that defied belief. The silence that descended upon the training facility was absolute. It was a heavy, profound silence, deeper than the mere absence of noise. It was the sound of dozens of minds simultaneously trying to process an event that their training and experience told them was impossible. The only sound was the faint hum of the monitor and the quiet, almost apologetic tink-tink-tink of hot brass shell casings cooling on the concrete floor inside the kill house. Then she emerged. Commander Sharma stepped back out into the light, moving with the same unhurried grace with which she had entered. She walked to the clearing barrel, her movements a perfect mirror of the safety procedures every recruit is taught, yet executed with a level of ingrained discipline that made them seem new. She dropped the magazine, locked the bolt to the rear, and showed a clear chamber to the range safety officer, who could only nod, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She then walked to the equipment rack and placed the M4A1 back in its cradle. The gentle click of metal on metal was like a gavel striking, ending the proceedings. She had not spoken a word. Her face was calm, her breathing even. There was no sign of exertion, no triumphant smile, no "I told you so" glance in the chief's direction. She had simply performed a task to a standard that no one in that room knew existed. She was a quiet professional, and the demonstration was the only statement she needed to make. The trainees stood frozen, like a collection of statues. Their faces, moments before filled with mockery and amusement, were now masks of pure, unadulterated shock. They looked from the monitor, still displaying the impossible time of 0:17, to the woman, and back again. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. The person they had dismissed as a paper pusher, a bureaucrat, had just delivered a performance of martial skills so far beyond their comprehension that it bordered on the supernatural. They were looking at a ghost, a legend made flesh, and the realization was a cold shock to their systems. Their world, with its clearly defined hierarchies of strength and skill, had been turned completely upside down. But the most profound transformation was in Chief Miller. His face, normally a ruddy mask of confidence and authority, had gone pale. The blood had drained from it, leaving behind a sickly, grayish pallor. His mouth hung slightly open, his eyes fixed on Sharma with a look of dawning horror. It wasn't just the shock of the performance. It was the sudden, crushing weight of his own ignorance. He had stood in front of his men, the men he was supposed to lead and mentor, and publicly mocked a master of his own craft. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed a sacrilege. He had displayed the very arrogance and prejudice he was supposed to train out of his candidates. The foundations of his identity, his expertise, his judgment, his authority, had been shattered in 17 seconds. He uttered a single phrase, a choked whisper that was barely audible. No, no way, it wasn't a denial. It was a plea for the reality he had just witnessed to be untrue. Because if it was true, then everything he thought he knew about his world was wrong. The silence stretched on, becoming more and more uncomfortable. No one knew what to do, what to say. The social contract of the room had been broken, and no one had the authority to write a new one. The quiet, unassuming woman had, through a single act of undeniable competence, seized complete control of the situation without ever raising her voice. She had proven her point. The respect she now commanded was absolute, earned not in the mud, but in a crucible of skill so intense it had burned away every last shred of doubt and condescension. It was into this charged, silent tableau that a new figure entered, her presence instantly changing the dynamics of the room yet again. The side door to the training facility opened with a quiet hiss, and Captain Eva Rostova, the base commander, stepped inside. She was a tall, imposing woman with silvering hair and eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of a 30-year career spanning the globe's most dangerous conflicts. Her uniform was crisp, her command presence an almost tangible force field. The moment she entered, instinct took over. Chief Miller, jolted from his stupor, bellowed, "Attention on deck!" The trainees, grateful for the familiar command, snapped to attention, their backs rigid, their eyes locked forward. The sudden noise was a relief, a return to the predictable hierarchy they understood. Captain Rostova walked onto the training floor, her polished boots making no sound. She didn't acknowledge the chief or the trainees. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Commander Sharma. She walked until she was standing directly in front of her, the two women framed against the backdrop of the kill house. The captain's face, usually a stern mask of command, was softened by a look of profound, almost weary, respect. She had been watching the entire exchange from the observation booth, a silent witness to Miller's arrogance and Sharma's astonishing response. She let the silence hang for another long moment, allowing the full weight of the situation to press down on every person in the room. Then, she spoke, her voice calm, but carrying an edge of cold steel that cut through the tension. "Chief Miller," she said, without turning to look at him, "it appears you've been providing my guest with some unauthorized training." The chief flinched as if struck. He started, his voice cracking. "Save it, Chief," Rostova cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. She turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the pale, shocked faces of the trainees, before finally landing on Miller. "Assumptions are the enemy of competence, Chief. They're the most efficient way to get yourself and your men killed. You assumed rank was a shield from the field. You assumed gender was a measure of strength. You assumed silence was weakness. Each sentence was a hammer blow, delivered with chilling precision. You were wrong," she stated, the finality of the words echoing in the vast space. "On all counts." She then turned her full attention back to Sharma. She reached out and gently took the clipboard from Sharma's hands, passing it to an aide who seemed to materialize from the shadows. Then she faced the chief again. "You were so eager to dismiss her title, Chief. Perhaps you should be made aware of what that title actually signifies." Captain Rostova held up a hand, and her aide handed her a tablet. She swiped the screen, her expression hardening. "This is Commander Anya Sharma," she announced to the room. The name meant nothing to them, yet. Her current assignment is with Naval Special Warfare Command, Special Project Division. A desk job. As you so eloquently put it, a bitter, ironic smile touched Rostova's lips. "But let's look at her previous assignments, shall we?" The room was so quiet that the sound of her finger tapping the glass screen was clearly audible. United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A low murmur went through the ranks of the trainees. DevGru. The official name for the unit the world knew as SEAL Team 6. The name itself was a thunderclap, a myth brought to life. The air crackled with sudden understanding. They weren't just in the presence of an officer. They were in the presence of royalty from the highest, most secretive echelons of their world. Miller's face, if possible, grew even paler. He looked as if he might be physically ill. But Rostova was just getting started. She began to read from the tablet, her voice a steady, relentless cadence of honor and valor. "Let's review the record," Captain Rostova continued, her voice resonating with the weight of history. "Commendations include the Navy Cross, the highest honor awarded by the Department of the Navy, second only to the Medal of Honor." The trainees exchanged stunned glances. "You didn't get a Navy Cross for filing paperwork. You got it for extraordinary heroism in the face of extreme danger." Awarded, Rostova read, "for actions during a high-threat recovery operation in the Hindu Kush, where then-Lieutenant Sharma, despite being wounded, single-handedly defended a compromised position against overwhelming enemy forces, ensuring the safe extraction of her team and a high-value asset. The clinical description failed to hide the raw courage of the act. The woman they had just seen move with such impossible grace had done so under fire, while bleeding, on a remote mountaintop halfway across the world. The story painted a picture so violently at odds with her quiet demeanor that it was hard to reconcile. Next, Rostova said, swiping the screen, the Silver Star, another of the nation's highest awards for valor. For gallantry during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, where she repeatedly exposed herself to heavy machine gun and sniper fire to drag 3 wounded Marines to safety. Fallujah. The name itself was a byword for some of the most brutal urban combat in modern history. The trainees, who dreamed of such battlefields, were now staring at a veteran who had walked through that fire and emerged a hero. Rostova continued, her voice a relentless tide, washing away every last grain of Miller's ignorant assumptions. Bronze Star with V for Valor. A second Bronze Star with V for Valor. Third, a fourth. A Purple Heart. Second Purple Heart. The list went on, a litany of courage that was almost incomprehensible. Her operational record is extensive, Rostova said, a masterpiece of understatement. Over 2,000 combat hours logged. Master Training Specialist certifications in advanced marksmanship, close quarters battle, asymmetric warfare, and high-threat driving. Her last field assignment wasn't behind a desk, Chief. It was as tactical lead for a Tier 1 unit designated Task Force Neptune. The name of the task force was classified, its missions the stuff of whispers and legends, even within the special operations community. To have been a team lead in such a unit was to be one of the most elite, most tested, and most lethal operators on the planet. Chief Miller looked like a man who had just been told the laws of physics no longer applied. His entire worldview, built on a foundation of observable strength and masculine archetypes, had been systematically dismantled. The quiet, unassuming woman standing before him was not just a warrior. She was a warrior scholar, a legend whose battlefield exploits dwarfed his own. The profound depth of his misjudgment was a chasm opening at his feet. Finally, Captain Rostova lowered the tablet. She looked at Miller, her eyes filled not with anger, but with a kind of pitying disappointment. Commander Sharma isn't here to observe your methods, Chief. She's here to rewrite them. The impossible scenario you set up for your trainees? She designed it 12 years ago. And the record time you've all been chasing? The 24 seconds is set by that Devgura legend you tell stories about. Rostova paused, letting the final, devastating truth land. That was her. She set that record as a lieutenant on her first evaluation run in this very facility. A record that no SEAL in over a decade has been able to touch. Until today, when she broke it herself. Cold, the revelation was the final, fatal blow. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of 1,000 assumptions shattering like glass. Then Captain Rostova did something that sealed the moment in history for everyone present. She, a decorated captain and the commander of the entire base, turned to face Commander Sharma. She drew herself up to her full height, her movements sharp and precise. She raised her right hand and rendered a slow, perfect formal salute. It was not the perfunctory salute between officers. It was a gesture of profound, unambiguous respect. A salute from one legend to another. Commander Sharma, Rostova said, her voice clear and strong. It is an honor to have you on my base. The story of what happened in Building 4 spread through the tightly knit community of naval special warfare with the speed and intensity of a wildfire. It began as whispers in the barracks, hushed conversations over meals in the chow hall. Trainees, their eyes still wide with the memory of what they had witnessed, recounted the tale to their peers. They spoke of the chief's arrogance, the commander's impossible calm, and the 17 seconds of flawless violence that had redefined their understanding of skill. Every telling added a new layer of legend. The single, perfect shot to the head of the hostage-taker target became a no-look shot. Her silent, fluid movement became, She moved so fast the cameras could barely track her. The story was a perfect military fable, a potent cocktail of hubris punished and quiet competence vindicated. It had all the elements of a foundational myth. Within 48 hours, the quiet commander was no longer a person. She was an idea, a standard. Her name became a shorthand for a level of mastery that transcended ego. Instructors on other ranges started using the phrase, "Are you moving, or are you moving like Sharma?" The tale jumped from the training grounds to the operational teams. Veteran SEALs, men who had seen everything, would hear the story from younger teammates and listen with a grim, knowing respect. They understood the deeper truth of it. In their world, the loudest man in the room was often the most insecure. True lethality, true professionalism was quiet. It didn't need to advertise. Commander Sharma had simply provided them with the ultimate, undeniable case study. The antagonist of the story, Chief Miller, was not ostracized or formally disciplined. Captain Rostova understood that public humiliation was a far more powerful corrective tool than a mark on a fitness report. Miller was forced to live with the consequences of his actions in the court of professional opinion, which, in the SEAL community, was the only court that mattered. He became a cautionary tale himself, but the experience changed him. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, and what emerged was something more thoughtful, more humble. A few days after the incident, he sought out Commander Sharma. He found her not in an office, but on the live-fire range, quietly mentoring a young trainee who was struggling with his pistol grip. Miller waited, standing at a respectful distance until she was finished. When she finally turned to him, he didn't offer a flowery, groveling apology. That wasn't his way, and he knew she wouldn't respect it. He simply stood straight, met her eyes, and said, his voice low and steady, "Commander, my assessment was incorrect. I was unprofessional. I request permission to learn from you." It was a profound admission of failure and a genuine plea for education. Commander Sharma regarded him for a moment, her expression giving nothing away. Then, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Granted, Chief." There was no condescension in her voice, no hint of triumph. It was the simple, professional acceptance of a professional request. In the weeks that followed, an unusual partnership formed. The gruff, veteran chief was often seen with the quiet commander, observing her as she taught. He rarely spoke, but he watched everything. The way she adjusted a shooter's stance with a single touch, the way she explained the ballistics of a round not with complex charts, but with a simple, elegant metaphor. He was learning a new language of instruction, one based not on intimidation, but on precision and quiet example. His own teaching style began to change. He yelled less and demonstrated more. He started asking his trainees questions instead of just giving them answers. He was becoming a better instructor, a better leader, forged in the fire of his own humbling. Meanwhile, a symbolic artifact of that day was created. The final target from Sharma's run, the one from the impossible room with the 3 perfect pairs of holes in the hostile targets, was carefully removed from the kill house. Captain Rostova had it framed and mounted in the main briefing room, the place where every CQB training session began. Beneath it, a simple brass plaque was affixed. It didn't list her name or the record time. It just said, "Assumptions are the enemy." It became a shrine to competence, a permanent, silent reminder to every SEAL who passed through that facility that the measure of a warrior is not in their voice, but in their actions. The ripple effects of that single, 17-second event continued to widen, subtly but irrevocably altering the cultural landscape of the training command. The framed target became more than just a memento. It became a touchstone, a point of reference for a new generation of warriors. The unofficial name for the lane she had run, the Sharma Channel, became official jargon, passed down from one class of trainees to the next. To successfully clear the Sharma Channel was a badge of honor, a testament to reaching a higher standard of focus and precision. The story itself became an institutionalized piece of folklore. New instructors were told the tale by their seniors as part of their own development. It was presented as the ultimate lesson in the dangers of prejudice and the supreme virtue of the quiet professional. It taught them to look past the uniform, the gender, the size of a person, and to seek out the evidence of their skill. It was a powerful narrative that armed them against the same kind of lazy judgment that had so thoroughly undone Chief Miller. The chief himself became the story's most effective evangelist. He never shied away from his role in it. In fact, he embraced it. He would often begin his first brief to a new class of trainees by standing them in front of the frame target. "Look at this," he would say, his voice now devoid of its former bluster, replaced by a quiet authority. "You see 3 perfect groups. What you don't see is the ego of a shooter, because there wasn't any. You don't see any wasted motion, because there wasn't any. This was not an act of aggression. This was an act of problem-solving. An equation of geometry, physics, and human will, solved in 17 seconds. He would then tell them the story of the quiet commander. He would tell them about his own arrogance, his own foolishness, never sparing himself in the telling. He used his own failure as his most powerful teaching tool. I made the mistake of judging a book by its cover," he would conclude. "I assumed I knew what a warrior looked like. That day, I learned that a true warrior doesn't have a look, they have a standard. Your job is not to look the part. Your job is to meet the standard." Commander Sharma, for her part, remained largely oblivious to the legend she had created. She completed her work at Coronado, rewriting several key training doctrines with an eye for efficiency and cognitive performance under stress. She worked with the same quiet, methodical focus she applied to everything. She deflected any praise, treating her record-breaking run as a simple matter of professional execution. She saw her skills not as a source of pride, but as a responsibility. Her philosophy was simple. Competence was the baseline, not the goal. The goal was to use that competence to make the entire organization better, stronger, and more lethal. Her humility was not a pose. It was the natural state of someone for whom excellence was so ingrained it required no comment. She was mentoring others not to be like her, but to be the best possible versions of themselves. Her legacy was not in the awe she inspired, but in the quiet confidence she instilled in the trainees she helped, the small corrections to a grip or a stance that would, years later, make the difference between life and death on a distant battlefield. She was planting seeds of competence that would grow long after she was gone, ensuring the future of the force she served. The legend of the Quiet Commander was not about a single person's skill. It was about an enduring ethos, a timeless principle that had been given a new and powerful avatar. A year passed. A new class of SEAL candidates, their faces a mixture of youthful determination and nervous apprehension, stood in the main briefing room of the Building 4 Kill House. They were listening to their lead instructor, Chief Petty Officer Miller. The man who stood before them was different from the one who had occupied this same space a year ago. The hard edges of his arrogance had been worn smooth, replaced by a deep, resonant confidence that came not from ego, but from hard-won wisdom. His voice was calmer, his presence more centered. He stood beside the frame target, his hand resting near the simple brass plaque. "Before we begin," he said, his gaze sweeping over the new faces, "we start with a lesson. It's the most important lesson you will learn here. It has nothing to do with how to shoot, or move, or communicate. It has to do with how to think." He tapped the frame. "A little over a year ago, in this very room, I disrespected an officer. I did it publicly. I did it because she was a woman, because she was quiet, and because I made an assumption based on her title that she was nothing more than a bureaucrat. I judged her by every metric except the one that mattered: competence." The room was silent. The trainees listened, rapt. This was not the kind of story they expected to hear from a grizzled SEAL chief. "That officer," Miller continued, "then stepped into the course you are about to attempt. A course that no one had been able to pass, let alone master. She did it in 17 seconds. She did not say a word before, and she did not say a word after. She let her actions speak for her. And what they said, what they screamed, was that my assumptions were worthless. My prejudice was a liability. The person I had dismissed was, in fact, one of the finest warriors this nation has ever produced." He paused, letting the weight of his confession settle. Her name is Commander Anya Sharma. The standards you will be held to in this facility were written by her. The techniques you will learn were refined by her. You are walking in her shadow. The lesson is this: respect is not about who is the loudest or the strongest looking or who has the most stories. Respect is earned through quiet, demonstrated, undeniable competence. In this world, you're what you can do. Nothing more, nothing less. The story had become a cornerstone of the command's culture. It was the first thing new trainees learned, a foundational parable that shaped their entire outlook. It inoculated them against the poison of arrogance. It taught them to be skeptical of appearances and to value skill above all else. The legend of the quiet commander had become a self-replicating piece of cultural DNA, passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the lesson of that day would never be forgotten. On a dusty airfield thousands of miles away, a young SEAL, a member of the very class that had witnessed Sharma's run, found himself in a complex, evolving firefight. His team was pinned down. The situation was chaotic. But amid the noise and the fear, a lesson from that day in Coronado surfaced in his mind. Economy of motion. Saw the problem. Ego is a liability. He took a deep, calming breath, just as he had seen her do. He identified the key threat, a single machine gunner that had his team suppressed. He ignored the lesser threats, focused on the critical one. He moved, fired, and neutralized the target with a controlled pair, a perfect execution of a fundamental skill. The tide of the battle turned. Later, back at the forward operating base, his team leader asked him how he stayed so calm. The young SEAL just shook his head. "I just try to be a quiet professional, sir." The legacy of Commander Sharma wasn't the framed target on a wall in California. It was this. It was a changed mindset, a whispered ethos, a standard of quiet competence being applied on a real-world battlefield, saving lives. True legacy isn't what you carve into stone. It's what you imprint on the hearts and minds of those who come after you. Commander Anya Sharma never sought fame or recognition. Such things are distractions, noise in a world that demanded absolute focus. Her currency was not accolades, but effectiveness. Her reward was not medals, but the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, a standard raised, a life saved. The story that swirled around her name was, to her, an irrelevant byproduct of a job done correctly. But for the institution she served, that story became an essential part of its immune system, a powerful antibody against the recurring diseases of arrogance and prejudice. It was a reminder that the strength of the community did not reside in a single, monolithic image of a warrior, but in a diverse ecosystem of skills, temperaments, and talents. It taught that the quiet analyst, the meticulous planner, and the stoic operator were all indispensable parts of the same whole. The 17 seconds in the kill house became a metaphor for a larger truth, that a single moment of undeniable excellence can silence 1,000 voices of doubt. It was a testament to the fact that competence is its own argument, its own authority. It needs no introduction and requires no defense. It simply is. The trainees who witnessed her run, and the countless others who heard the story, were changed by it. They learned that the ultimate form of power was not the ability to command attention, but the ability to command a situation through sheer, unadorned skill. They learned that the most intimidating presence is not the one that shouts, but the one that observes, processes, and acts with lethal precision while others are still talking. They learned that the ethos of the quiet professional was not about being shy or withdrawn. It was about a profound and unshakable confidence that requires no external validation. It is the confidence of knowing that when the moment of truth arrives, your actions will speak with a clarity and force that no words can ever match. Years from now, when new generations of special operators face challenges yet unimagined, the legacy of the quiet commander will endure. It will live on in the instructor who values precision over volume, in the team leader who listens more than he talks, and in the young operator who, in a moment of chaos, finds a point of calm within themselves and executes their duty with flawless, silent professionalism. That is the true nature of a legacy. It is not a story that is told. It is a standard that is lived. It is not what you leave behind in a briefing room. It is what continues to move forward on the battlefield in the quiet, competent hands of those you inspired. For more stories where competence triumphs over arrogance and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.